Paul Briggs is a guitarist for Perth instrumental band Tangled Thoughts Of Leaving, whose album No Tether is out now. They'll be playing as part of Postcards from the West in Perth at the State Theatre Centre of WA on the 15th of December. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Ben, it's great to be here. Nice to talk to you, man.
So I'm always sort of stuck a little bit how to start these interviews. But for you, I think there's a really nice way to do it because you're, in terms of the history of the band, relatively new to it.
Yeah.
Take it even further back from there. When did you first start working with the band?
Oh, I mean, it's funny in a way because it's like I started working with the band right around we grew up in the same town, and so when we were 17 and stuff, playing in band, when they started 10 years ago, I was there watching their shows. I think I missed the first show because I was underage to get in the venue, and then any Mandurah shows they played, which is one of the towns we lived by, I was there. But it kind of started out years ago, just Andy, a friend and who was the original guitarist of Tangled, just wanted to borrow one of my amps for recording. And so Ron was busy in the first amalgamation of his studio, just recording the Tiny Fragments EP, actually. And I just went over and lent my amp and had a couple of beers and a barbecue and stuff and just hanging out. And it was we always had a friendship from that point. And then probably, so about 2012 or so, Ron was actually recording another friend's band and borrowed that same amp again, and we just started hanging out, and I just happened to be interested in jumping on helping the guys out with their first Europe tour. So I ended up playing the kind of roadie and tech role and going around for those guys for actually both their Europe tours that they've done so far, and it sort of just blossomed from there. And then always had an interest in what they were doing, and obviously I play guitar as well, so it was handy to know that. But I'd always had a sort of tried to not be too being aware of their writing process and stuff, but always thought about it in my own way, where it's not be too influenced by those guys, because it's literally playing your friend's riffs if you're sort of informed by their writing style and stuff. But I've always been active in the process of Ron running his studio, and he's recorded all of the Tangled's albums, and just helping step in for, he's got to play piano at some point, so someone needs to run Pro Tools and run that side of things as well while they're going for these things. And I just ended up doing that quite a bit as well. It's something that's interested me for a long time as well, and sort of started out as a hobby and definitely picked up some skills from Ron, and it's been pretty interesting having that little extra knowing the guys and having worked with them before actually joining in as a full-time member as well. I definitely look back on it pretty fondly, and it was a great experience for anyone to have, especially someone that considers themselves as just a friend and not actually trying to professionally be someone working on the road and stuff like that. It was a great little step into the world of the music industry, and I quite enjoyed it.
How did you actually end up joining the band?
I think it was sometime after their last European tour. The guys were basically getting ready to settle in and had started jamming and getting ready to work on new ideas for a new album. It was kind of on the end of the Yield of Despair kind of touring cycle. And Andy, the the old guitarist, he just works a fly in, fly out job, and he was starting to sort of change his the things that he was going for in life, and started working more. He got a house and things like that. So he ended up just sort of coming forward to the guys and saying he wasn't quite feeling like it was right for him anymore, and he was feeling really good about it because I was kind of there, and the guy, like, we'd always kind of joked about it because we both play guitar and stuff, and so it was kind of just like a really easy transition in a way, and really just like amicable, in that, like, I mean, Andy still comes to shows and things like that, but he's like also, he's sort of like, he was only playing music because he was so interested in Tangled and playing for Tangled, but since then he's sort of kind of put his guitar away in a way, and tinkers every now and again, but he's sort of, he's changed his goals, I guess.
And what was it like sort of moving on from kind of friend, helping them out in sort of various ways, to actually being a key member of the band? It's
definitely been, it's been more fulfilling for sure. Like, you can't you can't lie about the fact that it's like, when you're a musician, there is a part of you that wants to be playing on stage when you're watching a band play or something like that, and like being and actually taking part in the creation. And it sort of, because I was helping with engineering and things like that, we already sort of had a collaborative relationship as well. So I wouldn't say that it was a massive difference in that, like, I already had pride for the band and things like that. And it's like, I've been literally a fan of this band since they started. And it's been something that's always interested me. And it just really, it just literally, I just got to start playing in the band and partaking in a way and just diving in at a deeper level. And it's been really great. It's been really challenging. Like, everyone is just really good at their instruments. And so you do feel a sense of like excitement in that, like, you're not like, there's dudes that shred way harder and all that kind of thing. And it's like, you always have this challenge and can always just like find new and interesting ways to play. And then when it's a band like Tangled as well, where it's like, even the writing and composition and all those things, there's no like rules in a way. It's like, there's a lot of wild cards and those kind of things. And it was really, so the whole No Tether process kind of started from the fact that, like, from the first initial kind of jams that we had together, there was like a really good and like powerful energy, and we had the ability to, those guys have played together for thousands of hours, and it's like, I had listened, but there's almost this, like, when you finally join in and you start helping paint the picture, it's like it changes in ways that no one really thought it would. And it kind of happened at a point where everyone was really ready to start taking on, kind of loosening up some of the, say, math rocky and like prog and tech influences, and starting to get more into like improv and free forming kind of stuff. So it really allowed for us to like really organically kind of build a live relationship and how we actually played as a group with the new lineup. It's been really interesting because it really is a kind of unique experience to get to spend like a couple of years with the guys doing the touring and doing those aspects, which are like, we're still a small band, so touring in Romania can be sleeping on a floor and stuff like that. So it's like you go through the lows with the band, and now it's like you start to join in on the highs and everything like that. And we've done some cool tours since I've joined, and it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm grateful for getting the opportunity as well. Like, that kind of outside perspective might give me a little bit more of that ability to appreciate that as well. Like, it's been pretty interesting.
Now, you sort of hinted at the sort of idea of the album. Let's dive a bit into that. When exactly, so there's sort of this transition of you joining the band. When exactly does the album begin to sort of take shape? What's the start of that process?
Oh, it's sort of it's because of how it has been formed. There was sort of, say, like the initial idea that we developed, and that was like, say, I think January 2015 or something like that, where it was like we had these jams where, say, like the initial progressions of how some of the songs actually work and some of the sections ended up being, they all came out in these improv jams. And then we we had a national tour booked with Sleep Makes Waves and the Contortionists that we ended up jumping on. So we shifted gears and went into kind of practicing a set, and we created new material. We actually road tested a new song, which was the first time Tangled had done that as well, where like literally just took a new song out on the road and tested it out. And we still sort of have that song in the background. It didn't actually even make it onto the album in the end. But we kind of focused on getting good at playing together live and learning from like songs like the title track from the last album, Yield to Despair, where being able to play with like an awareness of each other and there's improvisation and things like that. We use that to help develop maturity in the way that I played with the band and the way that the guys interacted with me and how my style fitted in. And then so after that tour, we came back in, and then we started essentially like jamming a lot, and we would have these seeds of ideas, and we kind of just started working, and we almost had to put like, okay, this is one basket here and we'll put these here and we'll work on them. But we had this whole other subset of stuff sitting in another basket that's like, none of that ended up making it on the album, but it helped to inform the way that we ended up putting together the actual form of No Tether. But as a process, like when we started recording with, I believe the first track we recorded was The Alarmist. And that was almost like the most kind of, I guess, we'd really developed the ideas and we brought it into a context of like a kind of like, you know, like a really strong form, but still using kind of elements of math rock and metal and drone, and like the way that it sludges down. It's got quite like it's got a form to it. There's like, everyone knows when they're hitting things. And then by the time that we'd gone through the whole process where we started to record other songs and get to like Inner Dissonance, for example, where it's almost all free time, and we had to kind of go through the process of recording everything to develop the ideas further and further. And it was like, as we were working on them, more details were coming out, and we just were working on all these things. And it's like, I think maybe like by December 2017, we'd come to the point where, okay, we've actually finished recording what the title track, No Tether, ended up being. But although No Tether was based off of ideas from that initial like jams from 2 years before, it had never even taken form until kind of towards the end, after we'd developed all this other language and we'd explored all the other ways that we could like actually look at how, what was essentially this feeling that we were grabbing from the first jam, which was like the idea of there just being like chaos and almost like beauty in that chaos, but also the idea of looking at order and the kind of the truth of the order to help kind of untangle the chaos as well. So there was times where I think there was songs that we recorded probably 3 times or so. We kept working at it because we really wanted to put something out that we were really, really proud of, but like that we had really applied ourselves for as well. Like we challenged ourselves to make the parts better like every week. And because of the like drawn out process of recording it, we have the luxury of Ron having a recording studio, so we can just like every weekend we can record, and that's what we do. It's like we get in there and we record, and if a part isn't sounding right, we play on it and we find out what we like about it, or we find new ways that we can look at it, and that ends up becoming like by the time you're like 5, 6, 7 tracks in, it's definitely we haven't streamlined the process, but it's really organic. We're really like playing the songs and making sure we were really conscious of having a really good live energy for it all, and that things would feel good to play in the room and really involve us playing it. And so in a way it was like we needed to be really aware while we were actually recording all of it. And we might have gone there's definitely versions of the tracks that we had where we could have released them, but every time we got new sections and things, we learned so much that we were able to reapply it to things. And it was almost like we just ended up doing like pre-production for like 2 years, and then everything took form. And then say in the last sort of 3 months of 2017, we really went, okay, we got really nice setups. Ron had upgraded some of his gear and stuff, and we went, okay, we're gonna get the final forms of everything. We're gonna release this because it's like it's ready, and it's got such like a great live energy about it. And I think that comes from the fact it's almost like we toured it in a way, like we played it over and over, instead of it being we've written it and played it a few times and then recorded it multi-tracking separate or whatever. It's like we played it in the room a lot, and a lot of it is recorded where either like it's all of us playing at the same time. For example, No Tether, the track is that entire song is pretty much everyone playing at the same like we're playing live in the room. And it's kind of the fact that to have that chaos and that intangibleness about a song, you can't just put a click track on and play your part. You need the other you need everyone there to be able to like play it together for it to take that form. It's yeah, so it ended up being quite a long process where it really did like say like, 2 years into the process, the final track actually kind of came out. And it's interesting in that we had the separate individual ideas for tracks per se, but when we recorded it, we did kind of record it in a linear fashion across the way the record goes, with the idea in mind that the album in entirety is one composition in a way. The long form kind of tracks that Tangled were known for, from like Yield to Despair and stuff like that, we took what we knew from all that kind of things, but we realized that this album ended up presenting itself in like different scenes, and there's like parts of the album where it's like it feels like the room changes and you're in a different environment. And we were conscious of those things and trying to really produce the environment with our actual instruments as well. Yeah, let's go with 2 years. After that long story, I'd say it was a 2-year long process to record, get the whole form of everything. And it had multiple different forms. And then this is the way that it organically kind of came out in the end.
One thing I always kind of wonder about bands which incorporate a good amount of, improvisation, but not just improvisation in a live setting, but really focusing on improvisation in a jamming recording setting is like, how do you know that the track is done? Like, when it's sort of, the idea is to be organically developing something and it can take 2 years. How do you kind of know when, like, yep, this is it, we've made it?
It's I'm not 100% sure a track can ever really be done in a way, but it started to get to the point where we were ready to work on new ideas, and not in a way where we were tired of playing the stuff, but where we felt like we'd explored things so in depth that it wasn't that there wasn't other routes to explore, but we were actually like, we were starting to really like what we were hearing. And like, when we were listening to it, we're like, yeah, that's how the song sounds. Like, so it's sort of, it almost, for lack of better words, like it told us itself that it was finished in a way. Like, but it's one of those things where it's like, if we had sat it to the side for 3 months, we would have come back to it with a complete new like take on it, and we probably would have just bogged down again and spent another year and a half recording new stuff. So it is that kind of like, I'd say that Ron was probably the strongest advocate in having the, like, I'm going to go with maturity to say that it's time to let it be, like, to let it out and to share it with people, so that otherwise we could have just like gone on to it forever. And like, some of our friends were joking about like, we're going to be recording this album forever. I think we joked about, we should just put like a live stream up where we just say, here's a new album, it goes forever, and then just basically play until we just either pass out or die or something like that, and just just almost play on that idea. But it's sort of like, after a while we want to play these songs live as well. So you almost get that cabin fever and you're ready to take it out and show it to people, so you can kind of release it and move on from it, and start working on new, fresh ideas. And it never felt like we ever rushed it. I think we might, it's hard to say, because I wouldn't say we're far enough away to have hindsight about it, but it's like, we didn't rush putting it out. We definitely let it mature, and like letting that process, because if you do just let something sit for 3 months, it can change a lot, and so much happens in your own life that you might end up just thinking about it in a completely different way. So you almost have to just call it and say, okay, we know when enough is enough, basically.
You, outside the band, do you write music or work on material? And if so, how do you go about it?
Yeah, I sort of have like a few projects just sort of running in the background. Before I joined Tangled, I had been working on sort of like a duo with a drummer friend of mine, where just kind of not a similar vibe to Tangled, but like slower drone and things like that. And we're kind of like, he's a graduate from Whopper, like doing jazz, the WA Performing Arts Academy. He's pretty happy to sort of just play improv now and again, and we just do our own thing. But so there's sort of, because I almost think about it where it's like, you can write for a band, you can write for an orchestra, or you can write for solo. And I do have these different little projects and baskets that I almost have like, okay, I'm working on some solo stuff and I'm working on some of those. And I find that there's a really interesting book that kind of talks about this. And it's like the whole, you set the space and you set the time. So I really like, on my days off, I kind of read some books and I get in the zone a bit, and then it's like, I know, okay, I'm going to get down to work. And you start just practicing and practicing writing as well. It's like there's a lot of times where I'm not writing because I'm trying to get an end piece in mind. I'm writing because I'm trying to expand my ability to use the vocabulary, and you're kind of honing your skills. And as you're doing that, it's kind of like you're waiting for inspiration to strike. And it's like, if you turn up and you're ready, you know, all your tools are ready, you're ready to play, and you're actually just getting into it and diving in, a lot of the time you will find that after a while you warm up and you start having inspiration and thinking about, like, not necessarily thinking about things, but getting in the zone and just playing. And I have like a recording set up at home as well, so I can record jams and things like that. And the way, so I get like, so when I approach that personally, I have more like I am interested in getting better at music. Like I'm sort of self-taught, but it's like it is something that interests me, and I'm challenged by it, and I'm definitely driven by that challenge. It's like I know points that I'm sort of weak at with my playing, so it's like I will work on those, but work on those in ways where it helps just broaden my abilities and even the way I think about the instrument, so that then when we go to Tangled rehearsal, with a lot of the time we are set up to record as well, so we can just sort of dive in and record and not worry so much about what we're playing, but listen to each other and interact with each other. And it's sort of like all those skills that you build in your personal time, you have the ability to pull those things out, and it helps you pull out the things that you can hear rather than trying to force something into a song or into a part that's happening. So I feel like I kind of approach it with that, like a work ethic in a way, where it takes a bit of discipline. There's days where I don't end up playing because I don't feel like doing that. And then it's like, it's almost harder to play the next day as well. And it's like that stuff steamrolls. So it's this, you got to kind of just like keep moving to even just like keep balance in a way, and like keep your skills honed. And it's definitely something that I've been working more and more on as I've moved, changed some work conditions and things like that. So I do have more time to be able to do these things. And I do feel like I can see that progression, and it's still really engaging. There's definitely times where I really enjoy looping and stuff, and I'll end up getting up in the morning and feeling inspired and cutting like a morning loop of that ends up being like feeling like a vibe or something like that, and I'll let that just sit for hours in the house and like make breakfast or something like that, and listen to how things move around, and you almost let the music explore itself when you can do that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a mix of like practicing on your actual ability, but also then sometimes using a little bit of technology and stuff to, like, delay pedals and stuff like that. Like, man, it's an awesome world of pedals now. They will help you just expand things from a way that you might not have been thinking about. And just trying to be open and curious with all of those kind of things, and think of it as like because it's an art form. It takes a while to get used to the idea of just that you are producing art in a way sometimes, especially like I've worked in like mining industry and oil and gas, and it's like a completely different mindset to how the rest of the world operates at times. So I definitely think like kind of having personal exploration, just like almost having the idea of like, oh yeah, I would like to write like a solo piece, but I also would like to write for an orchestra and things like that, and keeping that curiosity open and learning things from those, just to apply back to even then, it all translates back to, you can use all the information that you gain in every aspect again. So it sounds weird to talk about that. I think the way I practice is beneficial. I feel like it's almost weird to say that, but just because it's like, oh, that's a bit cocky, but like, yeah, it's almost like saying, if you play, you'll get better. And I do believe that. It's like you practice and you get better. You practice writing and you get better. So I wouldn't say that I write material with the idea of putting it out in mind, but I definitely write material to help me develop the ideas of things that I would want to put out and present. And it kind of helps me from like stagnating as well. So yeah, I find it beneficial at least.
Let's talk a little bit more about the album. The track Binary Collapse includes a lot of brass, a few trumpets, a few other instruments. Where did you guys get the idea to include those additionally to, the rest of you guys playing?
I'm not quite. I feel like the initial idea was there pretty early on, when the track had taken form. This was one of the ones. So like we recorded this, I think 3 times, and we had the overall form, but little things changed and it got better each time. And by the time we'd had that first recording of it down, we knew that we would, because this was more like a structured song as well. So it wasn't as much of the improv kind of aspect of things. It was actual writing and working on parts and like spend hours just working on the final riff and things like that. It was something that we could we could all commonly hear, and we do, like, brass is just such a great timbre, and it's definitely one of those things, like, especially on that track, I certainly as a guitarist was trying to emulate more horn section kind of and those kind of sounds. So we ended up, I guess we were like, why, if we can hear it and we have friends that can help us do it, we should give it a try, basically. And when we did, so we got our 4 friends down, and it just sounded so great without it even really being coherent that we were just like, yeah, we've made the right choice with this. It sounds, it really, I feel like it comes in at a point in an album where it's almost like you do need a little bit of triumph, and that song sort of does play on a little bit of the up and down and duality of life, highs and lows, those kind of things. So it just seemed to really help make that moment in the album pop in a way where it got better than any of us were expecting as well. And it kind of attained to a mood that was perhaps like a little bit further than we were trying to grasp for at the time. Like, so it was just another one of those cases of like being able to hear a sound and chasing it in a way.
One thing I always like to ask instrumental bands is kind of a weird question, but I think it kind of is always interesting. So obviously instrumental bands, for the most part, don't have lyrics, but they still, for the most part, have song titles. Where do yours come from, and what do they mean?
It's definitely one of the harder aspects. You're right. I'm sure most of the other bands would say along similar lines of possibly like it comes kind of late. Different strokes, different folks. So for us, the titles for these ones did kind of come a bit later in the piece, where we had working titles and we had concepts for those kind of working titles as well. But then it was a case of like actually setting our sights on, okay, we can hear the album mostly now. Like we can put on the pre-pro and listen to it, and let's find what these titles are that are resonating with us. And it really is a case of like for this one, like the four of us sitting down and just talking about titles for like a couple of hours and just listening to the album and playing with different words and things like binary collapse and things like that, where it is like I'd say a lot of the album we do kind of almost play on like a science and organic kind of meaning with a lot of the names. Like a lot of them are supposed to have a duality about them, where we could take an example of, like, say, binary collapse, where we were kind of thinking about like giant black holes and the way that the riff crushes into itself at the end, how it's almost like it gets an implosion. And I believe one of the titles just before binary collapse was binary implosion. And we kind of felt that almost took away the humanity of the title as well. We wanted there to be a reminiscent, like, connection to humanity within the titles as well. And so, like, you know, bringing it to like collapse, where it's almost, it feels like the same, where the whole riff does collapse in on itself and it gets that similar imagery, but it also has this feeling of, like, you know, imagining your loved ones collapsed or things like that as well, or yourself. And I feel like we sort of, because we came towards the end when we started to come and bring titles really together, like, it might have been the week before it went to mastering that we'd actually settled on all the titles. We did get to have that, like, maturity to sort of, we've thought about these tracks for 2 years in a way, and we've had time to think about what they mean to us and the imagery that we want to provoke with the titles. And yeah, so it was just that matter of fact of having the time to think about it and then sitting down and refining it as a team and coming up with something that's kind of like collaborative in the same way that the songs were as well, where it's like no one title was any one person's choice in a way. Like, everyone definitely came together to help them all get made in a way.
the title for the album, where does that come from?
So it sort of comes from the idea that with this initial jam we had, we were calling it just things like, we knew that it was wild and that it was just like thrashing around, and there wasn't necessarily like a pulse or anything like that in the song. And we wanted to capture a way to sort of express the idea of like something being almost like just being completely chaotic and free from any like actual grounding or anything like that. And this whole, because we sort of are almost playing on the idea of like space as well, in the like idea of, you know, if you become untethered, you float off into space forever and you're lost in the chaos kind of thing. But even in that, like when like society completely diverges and collapses into chaos, it kind of loses its connection with itself and like its human connection with itself as well. And it's almost like releasing the tether that ties everyone together as well. And it sort of comes from that idea that we tried to have some sense of chaos across the entire album. And when we come to the title track, there are parts where, because we're improvising and playing, like we're playing all the noise and all the dense kind of stuff while we're playing the other, while, you know, we're playing melodies and things like that, but it's so interwoven with all this noise and all this other stuff where it'll be like, we can't move onto our new section until the bass player does a certain thing. So you have to be hyper aware, but he can't do certain things until someone else does certain things as well. So there's almost this like passing the ball around, for lack of a better word, like, and everyone's just like keeping everything up and afloat by just basically constantly just like fussily moving our hands and trying to float this like waveform that doesn't really have a distinct pulse in a way. It's like the way that we collide with each other, to me, like I do feel like it ends up being like quite a intense like ocean of sound where there are ripples all over and they're collapsing into each other in different points, and there's peaks and troughs, and it makes it feel really light, like alive. And that was sort of the idea as well, in that like there is like a vibrancy and a movement in chaos, and that it's not necessarily like a bad thing either. Like we do need chaos for there to be kind of progression and evolution and things like that as well. And so we were trying to play with those ideas like compositionally with our improvisation as well. So yeah, a couple of meanings behind it in a way.
And the cover art, I think it was a drawing by, and I don't know how to pronounce it, so maybe best you pronounce it. But why did you pick that as the cover art?
Yeah, so the drawing was by Teo Trilor. That's from his series Another Grey World. We worked with Teo, so he actually did the album artwork for Yield to Despair, the album before, and we worked with Teo again when we went on tour with over the East Coast. We caught up with him again, and we had a great time. We were just chatting about some concepts and stuff like that, and he was talking about some similar things with the way he was exploring art at the time, like chaos and almost like a brutalist way, like almost, so like he's done all this work with pencils where it's like it's thousands and thousands of tiny strokes that then make up this giant picture. And it just happened to be that, so we're working away, and like Luke, our bass player, sort of keeps in touch with Teo, and we're kind of looking at his art, and the things that he was talking about and the names of his pieces and stuff was always really resonating with things that we were talking about. And we were just like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Like, so we almost had we had the idea of working with Tio from that. And then it ended up being that he presented us with like a bunch of artwork kind of towards the end of the process, and we like stuck all the artwork up on the walls, and every time we were at jam, we were just like looking at them. And his original artwork is actually all grey. It's all graphite pencil. And so we were kind of talking about that No Tether had a different shade about it. It had a different mood and feeling about it from Yield to Despair. And although we were working with Tiro again, we didn't want it to just be a direct continuation on from that album artwork. So we were just playing with those ideas. And yeah, it was probably only within the last few weeks of the whole process where we settled on this specific picture for the cover. And it partly feels like that was because it does leave this like questioning about it. And it is one of those pictures where it's like the longer you look at it, you can see other things. You can see like other little shapes in there and what look like almost like waves, and the way that it almost does look like a kind of like shadow kind of not only hovering over a mind but also coming out of, as well as like what almost looks like kind of cosmic background radiation or something like that, like seeping back into someone. And like we ended up finding that was a good metaphor for what we feel like the album does in a live sense, and even what one of the ideas behind why we were chasing the liveness of the album, for lack of a better word.
I want to move on and talk a little bit about the upcoming live show you've got. It's really, really interesting. I think a lot of sort of things to talk about with it. First of all, how did you get involved with this show, the Postcards from the West?
So Postcards is actually being organised by sort of like a friend of ours, Chris Wilden, who he's the manager for RTR-FM. And, you know, we've played shows with, because they do In the Pines and things like that. So we've had a nice rapport with the guys for quite a while there. And I believe they're doing it as just a way to sort of celebrate Australia, like Perth, for a while, and help sort of, you know, celebrate the sense of community that we have and wind up the year in a way. And so, yeah, Chris just ended up getting in touch with us like, oh, hey guys, got, you know, this idea for this show. Is this something you guys would be interested in? And so we happen to be, so we're, I mean, we've had the news come out that for a while now that so we're our drummer Ben, he's actually jumping back into finishing off his degree in jazz. So he's had to dedicate some time to that, and so we weren't going to be able to tour this year and things like that. And we had started working on the idea of working on some film score and those kind of things. So to us, it almost felt like it was something that we were already working on in a way, but we hadn't necessarily defined what we were going to do for a release or anything like that. So it's almost like, you know, red biking it in a way. It's like we were wanting to do something like this, and then maybe a month later we get an email about it, and we're like, well, yeah, that's awesome. We're actually thinking about doing this, so let's go for it. And that's actually given us a chance to, like, we've had to have like a deadline in a way, like to use the date of the gig to really get us, because like I said before with No Tether, where it's like we can just almost explore parts endlessly. So sometimes having that kind of deadline will actually help to take form. it's been great because we had this material that we want to record and we've been wanting to use anyway. And we've pretty much, we've written new material with the other material in mind, almost being like, yeah, we'll be able to use these guys together and form like a longer, so this is only going to be like a half-hour long set. We've almost used it as a way to energize our writing for other sections to finish off basically the next album that we'd be looking at putting out. So it's just a case of everything lining up at a good time for us to jump on, and it's hopefully going to be quite fun. We're recording all the jams and things now as we're rehearsing, and we're liking the sound of it as well. And it's because it's got the film score approach to it, we do get to play on all of the building of environments and layering noise in with the way that we play. And it's, I've used the word too many times now, but it has felt like really organic in the way that we've just been able to kind of just like step into playing and putting this new thing together. I'd say we definitely have the hopes and aspects that we would be looking at putting it out as a release of some kind. It sort of ends up being a way with Tangled where there's like an album and then possibly like a conceptual EP before then putting out another album. So it might just take some kind of form like that. But we're in an interesting point because we're going to play the gig this weekend. So we'll be recording it there, and we're almost hoping that that's going to be a live recording that we'll want to be able to release afterwards. So there's a little bit of like anticipation in being really excited about new material and how it's sounding. But then just the excitement of being able to have this kind of film score and production, and the other bands that we're playing with are really cool, and they're all different genres as well. Like there's a jazz ensemble and a improv jazz group, as well as like a hip hop artist, and it's going to be quite an interesting and broad palette for the night, but should be pretty fun nonetheless.
Now, for those who don't know, could you explain a little bit about what exactly the footage is that you're using and how you went about choosing it from the collection?
So so basically the idea behind the show is to use, like, we've got access to the State Library archives, and to use kind of footage that, whether it be, I think most people have gone with using like personal videos that people have put into the library. So like videos, we're looking at ones from like the 30s, like 1930s through to like 1960s and things like that. There's a lot of footage there, and the idea is to kind of portray Perth and the culture and community and the story of Perth through some of this footage. For us, because I guess because we do end up writing for kind of darker music, and we've looked back at some of the footage from like the 30s and all this black and white stuff, where it's like we do have footage of like early logging industry and things like that. There's a scene from a funeral from I can't quite remember who the person was. It was one of the like bishops of the first like cathedral in Perth or something like that, where it was like a state funeral, and we've definitely had a little dive in and tried to look for darker footage, and we're trying to present it in a way where we do have this almost sense of like nostalgia in some parts. Like it's not just one mood for the whole piece. So there are parts of nostalgia and tenderness And then there are parts of of unease and sadness, and it's a common story with a lot of civilizations, but it is part of the way that Perth has grown. And we've been talking about it in the way that it's like, this is what the cost to get where we are was. We've got footage there from, I believe it's ships departure from people 18-year-old men heading off to World War II and things like that. And it's like, it's important to understand the kind of price you've paid to get where you are in society. But we're also hopeful in a sense that we know it's good to be aware of those things, so that it's almost like you can make sure that the means of getting somewhere, it's not just about justifying the end. It's like the means need to be just as important in a way. And it's like, to not lose sight on the way that society is progressing, we need to be aware of the things that we have given up and the fights that we have had, and the sadness that that's all caused, and the lessons that that millions of people had to learn about that. That's not how we want our society to go again, especially with the World War II kind of theme in mind. So it sort of ended up being that we went on the individually went about just looking at lots, diving through lots of footage. It's like you can type in Serpentine Falls is a place that's actually near the studio, so it's like you look up Serpentine Falls and you can find footage from across various different decades, and it's black and white and color, and they have different feelings about them and things like that. And it's like, we did spend quite a few hours going through footage and talking about these themes, and then we actually used the idea that we wanted to use older footage and black and white kind of footage and stuff, and that helped us refine down to a point where we could concentrate. Okay, we've got, because we're talking about hours of footage for a half-hour long set, and I believe we've ended up taking, say, 5 to 6 different videos and presented different scenes from them with the different kind of movements throughout the piece. And that, after we had kind of got the general layout of it all together, it's stayed pretty true to form from that point. We've been pretty happy with how it's come together. And it's almost in a way where it's because of the fact that we're coming out of the back of writing for No Tether and recording and all these things, we haven't had a disrupted process of being out of the studio in a way. We haven't gone and toured for a couple of years. We've kept working, and that's kept the kind of the gears turning over, and everyone kind of just not only contributing, but also then just trying to think about parts from different perspectives as well, so that we can just find something that we're really happy with without getting too lost in jamming on things for weeks and months and recording things for years. So it's almost been a fast process compared to No Tether, but it's still been a few, I think the initial ideas that we were writing for it came about 6 months ago, from jams that we were doing, thinking about those film scores on our own anyway. So it's good that we've been able to bring an idea in that we were already thinking about, but then just gain access to really interesting footage that we hadn't even considered kind of using before the offer. And yeah, so it's good that doorway kind of opened up, and we're able to just sort of jump on while we've got the chance and just find things that resonate with us and present them to people as well.
Having chosen those particular pieces to have as your backdrop to your music, or I don't know, the other way around, whichever perspective you have you been jamming, rehearsing to the footage, or how is that working?
Yeah. We actually brought a TV over from like the house and brought it into the studio. So for about we've had like a working demo of the editing. Luke, the bass player, he does a lot of the video editing and things like that. So he's put together like a really good working demo that we were working off, say like a month and a half ago, maybe even 2 months. Like, and then that, yeah, like that hasn't had to change too much. Like it's been edited to fit with the way that scenes change, so that we can sync up with it more. And so like the last couple of weeks, we've definitely been playing where we've been watching and interacting with the film as well, and trying to. It's funny. I hadn't quite thought about it in that way, but it's not so much that it's about the music or the video, but hopefully that the video is playing a role in participating with the music, and the music's participating with the video as well, which is hopefully what you want to get from a good film score. And because it is something that we're super interested in, we have been trying to approach it with a film score mindset as well.
So I've interviewed, I think it was Cascades a year or two ago, and they actually had this weird thing where they found some old footage and they made a video out of it to accompany one of their songs. And then 2 weeks ago, maybe, I interviewed a band called Lage, and they did a kind of similar thing that you've done, except it was their EP set to a bunch of old movies, like old silent black and white movies. Yeah, it's really cool. I probably shouldn't say this, but like I've always found music videos kind of boring, because like not much seems to go on in them. Like it's a band playing and then a scene of something happening, which sort of lacks a lot of context. But I find these kind of things where you're setting old footage or old movies to music just kind of fascinating, because there's so many different ways you can reinterpret stuff. There's so many different layers that get drawn on top of it, and sometimes it's just purely accidental. And that's why I think it's really fascinating about these kind of things.
Yeah. Like I definitely find that interesting as well. There's one, like a band from France put out Year of No Light. They did a soundtrack to a film called Vampire from like I don't know, like the 20s or something like that, like a really dark black and white silent film. And like the way that it does add like another dimension to music as well, because it's like, you know, like you're taking up so much of your capacity for attention with music, but you still have something left over for visuals. And it's something that like we are kind of aware of as being an instrumental band, in that like people like producing music people will see different things in their mind and visualize different things. But then it's that whole idea of like, when you add video to it, it's like adding another writer or another player into the band. It's adding this extra just like perspective that does just open up the way that it can all be interpreted. And it you know, like you and I could watch the same thing and we would have completely different experiences because of the way that we interpreted them. And video just seems to because you're not visualizing things from your own personal kind of catalog, for lack of better words, it's just adding, just that extra, just whole, you know, especially when they're dark, like, you know, we both listen to quite a lot of dark bands, I'd say. It's like, it can almost make things even grimmer. And it's definitely something that we're excited about as a band. And I think we're looking forward to exploring it a bit more as well. And it does seem like there are more bands doing a similar kind of thing, where we might end up having a bit more long form music videos or something like that, which would be really cool.
Another really great example is fellow West Australians Bolt Gun, who did a, what was it, 20-something minute video from a Russian film that they
Yeah,
managed to get permission from, which was incredible.
it's like, and it's one of those films, like it was already quite a dark and tense film, and like you listen to it with Bolt Gun over, and it's really intense. Like, yeah, I really loved that release. And yeah, the film clip for it as well is just great. And those guys have played it live where they have had projection and stuff like that, and it's been cool to watch. It's definitely, yeah, an interesting tangent that's happening at the moment.
I want to run a theory by you, that this, and I've got no evidence for this. Like, I could possibly watch it with what I'm going to talk about, and it would make complete sense. I'm just wrong, and I'm just imagining this. But this sort of project would work better with the kind of footage you're talking about from the 60s to the 30s, because old footage, because of a lot of different reasons, the people look different because of the clothing they wear, the houses look different, the technology looks different, the just way of filming looks different, both because they position cameras differently and they have different filming footage that kind of feels in a certain way like a movie, like it's something foreign, it's not real.
Yeah. I definitely, I catch what you're on about. Like, it's the not necessarily like the alienness of it, but like the detachment as well. And it's like a surrealism about it that's just like, especially if you're listening to music where it's like almost out of bodily in a way. It's like it does let you kind of almost invest in this like bizarro alternate universe where it's like things can still feel so personal, but because you're not like, it's not like you're seeing someone in the news today in a film and you're like, oh, cool, that's that person. And then you're losing concentration. You're able to get engrossed in it because we're so detached from the era. At least I like that theory for sure.
So with this piece you've been working on with this show, you mentioned earlier that you're currently down a drummer. How have you approached that particular angle of it?
So we mostly, because with like the initial ideas that we were working off, it was coming from a jam, like jams where we were playing as like a three-piece, like guitar, bass, and piano. So because like we're working with looping and layering like some triggered samples or things like that, where it's like even little things like rattling bells and things like that. But so I feel like we spent a bit of time just developing a bit more language together, and we got it to a point where we really liked it, sans drums. But I guess we had a few friends around that could help out, and we just wanted to find out what it was going to be like if we were thinking it more as percussion rather than drums. And that's definitely the way we're still approaching it. So we're actually going with two drummers. We've got one of our friends, Jacob, who used to play in a band called Foxes, that Ron also recorded. They put a pretty cool release out as well. He's taking on the sort of kit role. And then we have our friend Lenny Jacobs, who's just like a jazz cat. This is the guy that I play in a duo with sometimes. He's taking on the percussion role and using bigger toms and just really big cymbals and things like that. And we're sort of, when I say we're sort of writing from a film score aspect, it's sort of in that, like, there are parts that are beats and, there's parts that are in like 3/4 and things like that. But like when there's things that are free time and ambient sections and kind of noise sections, we do have that space where we're getting like nice big cymbal swells and things like that, and big tom hits and just little things like that are just, there's a reason why there's drums in in heavy music and just in almost all music in a way, because they are like a primal instrument, and they sound good and they take up a certain space of their own that we've sort of worked on the fact that, cool, we know how these sounds fit in and how can we interact with them in a way that we really want to, and allow them the space to kind of not feel like they've got to take up a traditional drum roll and just play beats everywhere, but to really sit back and try and think of it as like a wider scale composition, and what roles they're playing and the dynamics adding. And it is just, it's one of those interesting things. We play the songs as a 3-piece and they sound really dynamic and great. And like we can get down to such a low level of sound, and then peak so high as well. And then you add the drums back in and they almost multiply those parts. Like the peaks get even louder and more intense. And the troughs can stay delicate and nice and warm still. So I think we've mostly just been trying to have fun with it. And it's definitely, I'm not going to say that we would do it forever, but we definitely love it'd be a dream to be able to just take 2 drummers around everywhere and play like massive shows and kind of get a light. Like, we love bands like Swans and Colder Luna. So all those extra layers that we always kind of writing in the back of our minds, to actually have an extra player playing those, it's really fun, and it does like open up the whole sound as well. But it's one of those things where it's like, it's expensive to tour, and it's like, we live in Perth, so when we do an East Coast tour, we've got to take 5 flights. We can't just jump in a van and drive around. So it's like, it'd be interesting to see where we go in the future with it. But it might be hard to justify being able to take 2 drummers around all the time, although we'd love to.
Last question about playing live, and this is more broad because I imagine tomorrow, Saturday will be a very special experience. But like, what are you trying to do when you're playing live?
It's it's an interesting concept in a way. For me, like playing live, it's about actually presenting your art to to people and like to share it. But obviously, you could send someone a CD. The live aspect is like it's. I've read some interesting concepts about this kind of stuff where it's like you're sort of, because you're having to like play in the moment kind of thing. There's the idea of like that, because there's people watching, you almost have this like hyper concentration and are way more attentive to the song, but also able to like get more deeply immersed into the song as well. Um, and it's when you're creating art, it's like you're essentially like, we're creating things that might be able to last forever and things like that, but we're doing it at the cost of actual like life. Like it literally takes time and you have to be there to play live music. It's not like a painting where you do a painting and it can go out in galleries and stuff like that. It's like you actually have to participate in it emerging. And so it kind of helps build like a deeper connection with music, I think. And then so when we talk to people after Tangled shows, there seems to be quite a common thread in that, like, people feel quite deeply connected to the music and feel quite emotional through parts. Like there's definitely, and we kind of write with that in mind as well, like there is a catharsis to heavy music for sure. And there's a way that like heavy and dark music draws attention to some people as well, that then helps them like kind of be drawn into it. And then the way that we play with contrast in our music, we do want to have tender moments. We do want there to be parts where it's like you've stripped everything away and it's just like touching on something that's resonating in your heart or something like that, where it's like it can be different for other people, but there are common themes in life of like love and loss and things like that that can be sort of shared, but also it does allow this connection and it with the people in the audience as well. Like, so I think it might also help that it's like when we're playing live, it is it's loud. Like it is quite a experience where it's like your body's shaking. Like we've had people talk about it before where it's like, they can feel the bass resonating in them. It's quite a bodily experience as well. And when you can feel the pulse of those things pulling at you as well, it is an interesting aspect of music. And I think maybe people that play like quite heavy music or trance music and things like that, or like, I want to say like transcendental music in a way, like people like Philip Glass and things like that, where it's like they know there's an engrossment and also this sort of sense of like pulling people in, but they're also growing from the experience, and because they're thinking about things from that different perspective. And it's almost like the same way where you're talking about the engagement from having old films and things with music. It's like when it's almost like being told a deep truth about yourself by someone else. It's like you might have partly known, but it's like you're actually having it like put into your, like, put in front of you and having to look at it. And it is this, it's I feel like it's something I've thought about in a deep sense, but it's also like, because music's so primal and so deeply ingrained in our culture. Like, I think we had music before we got out of caves and things like that. It's hard for me to say, like, what it is about live music that creates that connection or anything like that. But it's definitely something that we've like been talking about with the people that come and see us and engaging in. And it's definitely something that, like, the idea of No Tether being such a live album, in a sense, where it demands such participation and awareness from us as players that people can't help but be drawn into the fact that we're so almost like in the zone in a way. And like, it's something where hopefully we're like strengthening humanity in a way. Like, we're helping people kind of either like develop, like, or work through hard times that they're going through, like emotional times and things like that. Like, we do have people talk to us about how, like, I don't want to get too deep on it, but like a friend in Germany was talking about how the only thing that he was going through when he was going through chemotherapy, the only thing that kept him going was listening to like the album Dead in the Fields and things like that. And it's like, there is this real strong emotional connection with people with music. And when you play that live, it's because you're all there and you're in that experience together. It is, I feel like, a stronger connection, and does help people pull into it and it helps people feel part of a community as well, I believe. And it's like, in this kind of world where people are like almost suffering from isolation because everyone's so overwhelmed and overstimulated that they need to shut off at times and things like that. And like, these are things we were talking about when we were making the album, like the disconnect in society and stuff, and the almost like angst that people have with technology as well. And it is this kind of thing where music does help people build a connection with other people as well. So it could be like, say, shared empathy and things like that. It's a very interesting process to take part of. And I wouldn't even necessarily say that it's something, it's like, I wouldn't say that I consciously jumped into playing music knowing that that is something that could happen. It's more something that we've discovered along the way. And I'm sure many other musicians would be able to talk about that similar sense of like connection with the crowd and almost that like feeling of maybe like duty might be a good word for it, where it's like you feel like, because you're thinking about some of these concepts and trying to apply them into music, that you're helping other people to learn these things and connect with these ideas as well, and helping just people in general that may not have the time to think about these things or the time to try and connect with themselves, to actually like to try and step into that or develop those kind of things, which like I personally think is sort of a way towards how we can develop as a society as well and move forward without basically just collapsing into complete chaos and everyone just bloody stabbing everyone in the street or something like that, to be grim. Like, if we have connection with each other and with community and we feel a part of our society, then that will hopefully lead to sort of more of it being made, rather than a destructive force taking over or something like that and collapsing it all.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about yourself now. When did you first start listening to music in this kind of broad category, and what was it that attracted you to it?
I sort of feel like for a long time I've had an interest in broad range of genres, sort of from the get-go in a way, and like I was definitely always interested in music growing up as a kid, and I had some older cousins that were musicians as well, and they would show me things like you know, they're like 10 years older than me, I think. So it's like things like Tool and bands like that, as well as like old blues players, and even just, you know, from Hendrix to like, say, Deep Purple and things like that. Like, there was a broad range of music, but there's always been a sense of that. I think I've never been able to like listen to an album where every song sounds the same. It kind of, I almost feel not let down, but like it's like, oh, like I find it almost like too one track mind in a way. So sort of, I think just like listening to just even just film scores, like I know the like Nick Cave and Warren Ellis assassination of Jesse James. It's like one of those kind of scores that you can listen to over and over again and hear different things. The way that instrumental music moves, and the fact that it's kind of like, you know, we're not set in a genre in a way, that stuff's always been interesting as well. And I found that I would say over like the last 5 years that I have listened to a more broader range of music, in terms of actually like letting some more pop music and that kind of stuff, like you know, listening to the radio and checking out different radio stations and things like that. But I've definitely been. I mean, my older cousin was like a classical guitarist for a little while at school, so I remember listening to like pieces from him, and then like getting interested in classical music when I was like 12, and always finding it really interesting. But then also like finding out about bands like, I think it was actually James, the original drummer for Tangled. So this was like 10 plus years ago. Turned me on to like Opeth and stuff like that, where you're listening to. I listened to the Deliverance Damnation album, and it's like almost it's a clean album that's almost like Jeff Buckley-esque in parts, in the way that he sings and things. And then you listen to the Damnation Deliverance side, and it's all heavy metal. And I think that was one of the first albums that really brought me into like listening to like screams and darker kind of, not necessarily darker metal, but like being way more accepting of those kind of things, and knowing that it's not just like someone yelling for the sake of yelling, knowing that it's like there can be like composition to it, and understanding it as a layer. I feel like I've given you a really broad answer to that question, but yeah, even just, I was obsessed with like Jimi Hendrix growing up as a kid as well, and it's like the difference in the way that how some of his albums were, and the extra noises in it. I always found the kind of like the interesting passages where they'd go off into jams, or like you'd hear live versions where things were different, and those were always intriguing and interesting. And it was always kind of, it always pricked my ears up in a way to hear those like, oh, he did that this so it's been a long time of developing, I think. And I think it's just about being open and curious about music in general.
When did you pick up the guitar, and why did you keep playing it?
I think I first started playing guitar like I have a memory as a kid of just like learning like Smoke on the Water from my cousins when I'm like 8 or 9 or something like that. And it's like, I feel like I can remember being a kid running down the hallway with like a fake guitar, like when I'm 3 years old or something like that, and being like, yeah, I want to play this thing. And then sort of like, I didn't get to really touch it for a few years. Like, and there was almost this anticipation of like, oh yeah, like, so when I finally got my very first guitar for like a Christmas or something like that, when I was like maybe 11 or 12, I just wanted to play it. And I knew I was getting it for Christmas. So anytime mum and dad were out, I like snuck in their room and unwrapped it and like played it for a little bit, and then like wrapped it back up perfectly and put it back in the box and hid it in the closet again. And like, just they probably knew the whole time, but I was like, oh wow, like so excited that I could just have a guitar. And I remember, like, for the first few years, it was like every day I'd play. Like, even now, it's like rarer there's a day that I don't play that I do, and it's interesting. I almost have a love-hate relationship with guitar as well, because it's like there's things it can't do and there's things that I can't do on it, but it's like it's also something that I have spent a lot of time with and am comfortable with, and I really like to try and get the guitar to sound like other instruments and not just sound like guitar. Like, I'm not as interested in like kind of like just like, like shredding arpeggios and things like that. Like, I want my guitar to sound like a broken organ rather than here's my sweet sweeping tone kind of thing. So I feel like I've definitely got an interest in other instruments and things like that as well, but guitar just seemed to be the one that just ended up in my hands, I guess.
Being from Melbourne, I don't really have a good feel of like what the Perth scene is, sort of broadly musical. What is the Perth scene like? Does it have a character?
I feel like you're almost there. It's broadly musical. It's Perth's really interesting in that, like, we're quite spread out. So, like, for example, our studio is like a 45-minute drive south of Perth. But we, like, when we play shows, we play in Perth because that's where most of the venues are. And there's venues around the place, but there is like a really tight, well, not tight, but there's a great culture around Perth where there are people that are interested in a lot of different genres. And there is a lot of different, I'd say there's almost like separate scenes around in Perth, but there's these little like just interface zones where it's like, for Tangled, for example, we're kind of a heavy band, but in this gig we're playing with like jazz and hip hop bands and things like that, and even like I feel like RTR does have some responsibility in helping to actually pull the communities together by kind of presenting something that's like, hey, here's Perth music, and we're actually proud of Perth music. And there's almost this like, you step out of the culture of the local music scene and talk to people that are like, sometimes you Joe Blow down the street that's like, working FIFO or something like that. He doesn't even know any of the bands in Perth. He just listens to like Triple J and doesn't partake in the kind of local scene. And it is, but then, he still goes to music festivals and things like that. So there's almost this like outer culture of when big touring acts come and big festivals come and stuff like that, like people do go and people really do like live music, and the festivals have always seemed really, really great when I've gone to them. But then there's almost this like inner sanctum or circle of just like the local music scene where all these different bands are just interacting. I feel like because everyone's appreciative of how hard it is, I'm not going to say it's hard to make music in Perth, but appreciative of the fact that because we're not a massive population and we're not like, people don't necessarily consider us on the forefront of like music and things like that. Like, we're not getting considered like Brooklyn or something like that. But so we've got to work harder to even put on shows. Like, to have a venue put you on, they've got to not want to put on some other show, like some other thing that like that they think will just make money and sell lots of beer over the bar or something like that. So it really helps that, and I feel like the community is actually like getting more involved with each other over the last few years as well. Like, it's starting to snowball and pick up. And there is this almost intermingling of those different scenes, like the sort of hardcore scene and like metal scene and the psych scene, and there's like garage and all those kind of things. And because we're all playing in venues, and it's almost like, there's not 20 bands to choose from to play with. So once you've played a few gigs, it's like you do start to go like, oh, like who else is around that would be cool to play with? And people of different genres do play on bills with each other and stuff like that. I feel like it's partly to do with the isolation or the distance that everyone has to travel, that everyone is more like willing to give each other a hand and to help book people, and or like even things like, it's like, we always consider when our friends come over from the East Coast to play shows and stuff, it's like, we want to help them with gear and things like that, because it's like it can be ridiculous to try and get gear. And it's like even just doing things like that where you're helping out friends' bands with gear and stuff, you end up getting exposed to other things, but then other people from the scene come as well. And I say scene, but I think more it's starting to build like a really nice community, I'd say. And like, yeah, it is interesting that sort of having like RTR as a radio station that is helping actually develop that and bring people together. And I feel like this show is an example of that as well as like the other great shows like In the Pines and things. So it's really helpful to have that kind of like step up from another platform that does have the ability to give a bit more exposure as well, because it's not necessarily, we don't have population density, so it's not like you play in the main street in Perth and you'll get 100 walk-ins. You're relying on people knowing about the shows and word of mouth getting around, and just people actually being genuinely interested in coming to see the show as well. Yeah, it's quite interesting to see how the community is building and developing. And I'm pretty hopeful that it will keep going. And with all we're talking on podcasts right now, with all the way that technology is opening up all these new avenues to just get out there and share music and just communicate with people. Hopefully it just makes it easier and easier for people to be part of the community.
What have you been listening to, reading, watching, any of that stuff lately?
I've been listening to The Set a bit. So a little bit of the Tangled music, for sure. But, I spend a bit of time listening to podcasts and stuff like that. One of the main ones probably being like Joe Rogan, where you do get to hear sort of scientists and some of these other mathematicians and people like Jordan Peterson or like Eric Weinstein, or Elon Musk is on there. It's like, it's really great to be able to hear people talking in a longer format. And that is probably the thing I enjoy about it. It's like you can't hide with preconceived answers in a way. Like, you need to talk genuinely about things. And when you see people talk, like the way that, like, I honestly think like podcasts are kind of hopefully help change the political landscape, because you can't just sprout out a whole bunch of fake facts and then not back them up. It's like you have the ability to go, okay, let's actually look at this and prove this and things like that. So it's been interesting to just listen to some of those things every now and again. Bands-wise, like, been listening to the Necks a bit. They're an Australian kind of like jazz, like textural jazz band. They're had a chance to see them play live a few times, and they're like another one of these bands where it's like they're really pushing with the playing with awareness and attention and actual tension as well. I feel like I've listened to with trying to sort of broaden, I've started listening to a little bit more like classical music and things like that again throughout the year. I love just going on like either YouTube, and I'll check out anything from like, the pure frequency things and like shamanistic healing music through to like classical, like Requiem by Mozart is a devastating piece. And things like even contemporary, like Steve Reich or Philip Glass. But I also really like just getting on like Bandcamp and exploring genres, and just seeing what people are doing and the rate that people are putting music out now. It's like you almost can't keep up with how much is coming out, but it's really interesting to see there's like these like common threads and things like that developing. And so like touching on, I sort of read a few books, a few older books this year so a book called like The Art and the Artist by a German man, Otto Rank, that's like written in the 60s, where he's talking about like critiquing art and the emergence of creative impulse and things like that. And so it is interesting to sort of start taking in art and music where you're seeing like the commonalities that multiple bands are kind of showing, and like the way that music's emerging with culture, and even the fact that it's like the way that music it's a reflection of what culture is like at the time that it's made as well. So you almost get an insight into the way that the world is perceiving itself. And I find looking at something like Bandcamp, where you can just like explore genres endlessly, and you're seeing all this new, like listening to all this new stuff that's coming out all the time. It's like you're almost keeping up to date with what people around the world are playing and what they're putting out. And it's interesting that something that is essentially like, it's a free marketplace in the sense that like it doesn't really cost musicians that much to have a Bandcamp and to release their music on that it's allowing people to release things that they might not have released, like say 30, 50 years ago, where it's like, 50 years ago you needed to have a major record label, when now it's like you could record a song in the morning and put it on Bandcamp in the afternoon and 10 people might hear it like straight away or something like that. But it's like that really is quite a new concept and technology for our society. Like it used to be, say 300 years ago, the only way you heard music was you had the chance to go see an orchestra, and then you were completely destroyed and overwhelmed by it. And like it's a really massive experience. And now it's like you can just instantly get an infinite amount of songs in your headphones. So there's a little bit of that, like you want to, there's definitely favorite bands that I have, and it's like you start to appreciate people for their writing and their composition, and listening to people for multiple recordings instead of just say having like a favorite album. But having said that, there are bands where it's like, oh, that's my favorite album that they've got. Like, I'd say something like Something Along the Somewhere Along the Highway by Cold Luna would be like a band favorite. And that's one of those things where it's almost like an album that's been able to withstand the test of time as well. I think it was put out like 12 years ago and it still sounds relevant. So there's definitely like a good place in the world for music that's actually had time spent on it. But it's also really interesting to be able to ingest music that's just being produced on like an insane like scale, in a way, like hundreds of hours of new music's getting put on the internet every day, in a way. So I think it's good to have a mix of being open to it all and trying to remain curious and listen to stuff, but also finding albums that really resonate. And then when you do find those, it's like I have albums that I will listen to like hundreds of times, and you hear new things in them when you listen to them over and over again. And I feel like it's an interesting form of art that's almost because it is such a live thing, it's almost in a really interesting point in its history, because you can sit and listen to music in your room and have a connection with it, but you can also go to a gig and engage with it. And it's not, I can't say which way you'd engage with it deeper either. Like they're both just different aspects of the same kind of broader creation. So it's really great to. It's an interesting time to be alive, I guess. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking that too.